Hello and welcome to Module 2. In the last lesson, we looked at what trustworthy AI actually means. In this module, I want to show you where that trust is built and where it can just as easily begin to unravel. The key idea is simple. Trust is shaped across the lifecycle. By the end of this module, you should be able to answer 3 practical questions. What are the main stages in an AI lifecycle? Where should governance sit at each stage? And why do frameworks and the UK route matter here? A lot of organizations treat governance as something you do near the end. The system is nearly ready. Someone asks for a sign-off, a few documents appear, a review takes place, and everyone hopes that will be enough. In practice, that is often far too late. A better way to look at the life cycle is as a relay race. At each stage, one set of decisions gets handed to the next. If something important is dropped early, it does not magically repair itself later. It follows the system forward. That is why lifecycle governance matters. So what do we mean by the AI lifecycle? In practical terms, we are talking about the journey from idea and design, through build and testing, into launch, monitoring, change, and eventually retirement or replacement. Each stage leaves fingerprints on the next. If the idea is vague, the design becomes vague. If the design is weak, the build carries those weaknesses forward. If testing is thin, launch is based on confidence that has not really been earned. Governance belongs inside the journey because every stage creates decisions, evidence, and accountability that the next stage depends on. The idea stage is where the organization decides what the system is for, who may be affected, what inputs will be needed, and what success is meant to look like. This is not just a technical conversation. It is a governance conversation because it sets the justification for the whole system. If the problem is unclear, the system can easily become a solution looking for a purpose. If the affected people are not considered, fairness, transparency, and oversight questions arrive too late. Good early governance asks whether AI is justified, what the boundaries are, and what evidence the organization will need before people are affected by the system. Design is where the use case becomes a working model. This is the point to define users, affected people, boundaries, data needs, oversight, and controls before the build starts. The governance question is not only whether the system can be built, but how it should be shaped so it remains safe, useful, and accountable. If human judgment, access, escalation, and evidence requirements are left vague at design stage, development will inherit those gaps. So design is a governance checkpoint, not just a technical activity. It turns intent into operating rules the rest of the life cycle can follow. During development or build, the questions become more concrete. What data is being used? Who can access it? Which assumptions are being built into the model? Workflow, prompt design, or supplier configuration? Which supplier claims are being accepted too easily? Where are the security boundaries? This matters because build decisions turn governance intentions into actual system behavior. A slide may say there will be human oversight, but the build may make that oversight difficult. A policy may say data should be minimized, but the configuration may pull in more information than needed. The governance habit here is to make build choices visible while they are still changeable. Testing and validation are where trust is either earned or simply assumed. A system that performs nicely in ideal conditions may behave very differently in the real world. Good testing asks practical questions. Has the system been tried against realistic scenarios? Have edge cases been explored? Are there fairness concerns? Could a user misuse the tool? Could an attacker exploit the workflow? What evidence would make a responsible person comfortable with release? The key point is that testing should create evidence, not just reassurance. It should help the organization decide whether the system is ready, whether controls need strengthening, or whether the use case should be paused. Deployment or launch is more than a green light. It should confirm that the organization is ready for live use, not just that the technology can be switched on. That means user guidance, operating limits, human oversight, escalation routes, security controls, and incident routes should all be clear. People need to know when they can rely on the system, when they should challenge it, and what to do when something seems wrong. A good launch decision does not simply mark the project as finished. It makes controlled use possible. If I wanted you to remember one metaphor from this lesson, it would be this. Governance is not the doormat placed outside a finished house. It is in the foundations, the wiring, the locks, the maintenance routine, and the checks you make when something changes. Trustworthy AI works much the same way. If purpose, ownership, data relevance, and oversight are weak at the start, the system may still look tidy later, but the risk has already been built into the structure. This is why early governance is not bureaucracy. It is how the organization avoids building avoidable weakness into the system. After deployment comes monitoring, and this is where mature governance really shows. Systems drift, context shifts, data changes, vendors update products, new users arrive, threat actors probe for weaknesses. A model or tool that looked acceptable a few months ago may no longer deserve the same confidence today. Monitoring is the discipline of keeping your eyes open and noticing when the assurance case starts to weaken. The goal is not to watch everything for the sake of it. The goal is to know what signals matter and what should trigger review. Change matters because risk can shift after launch. A software update, a new data source, a model tweak, a new integration, a vendor change, or a new business team using the system can all alter the assurance picture. Change control helps the organization decide when something is routine and when it should trigger fresh review, documentation, or approval. The question is not whether change is allowed. The question is whether the organization understands the effect of the change. Good lifecycle governance makes change visible before confidence becomes stale. Retirement is part of the AI lifecycle, not an afterthought. An AI system should not stay in use just because it was approved once. Over time, its purpose may no longer fit, performance may weaken, risk may increase, supplier support may change, or the business may move to a better option. At this stage, governance asks whether the system should continue, be replaced, paused, or taken out of service. If retirement is needed, the organization should manage the exit properly. That means handling users, data, access, records, integrations, and supplier dependencies in a controlled way. The key point is simple. A trustworthy lifecycle includes knowing when to stop and how to stop safely. Frameworks and standards are useful because they reinforce the lifecycle view. NISTAIRMF helps people think about risk in an ongoing way. ISO/IEC 42001 encourages a management system approach, which means governance becomes part of organizational discipline rather than a one-off exercise. ICO AI guidance reminds organizations that where personal data is involved, expectations around fairness, transparency, accountability, and lawful processing can attach across the lifecycle. You do not need to memorize every framework. You do need to know where each one becomes useful in practice. The value is in the questions, records, controls, and improvement habits they help the organization create. The wider UK route matters because it pushes organizations to join the dots across existing regulators, sector requirements, data protection, security, assurance, and practical governance. It is a principles-based and sector-led route, so lifecycle judgment becomes important. The EU route is more formal and risk-based, especially for higher-risk uses. The UK route is different, but it does not remove the need for disciplined governance. In either route, organizations still need to explain decisions, keep useful records, and defend why the system is appropriate in its context. That is why lifecycle governance is not just a tidy model for a slide deck. It is a practical way of staying in control when expectations are distributed across several obligations and oversight routes. A good real-world example is an AI hiring tool. It might begin life as a shortlist assistant. At launch, people may see it as harmless and helpful. It reduces admin pressure, brings a little more consistency, and supports managers rather than replacing them. At this point, the governance story can look reasonable. The intended use is narrow. The human role is clear. The evidence supports a limited release. The operating limit is that the tool should not become the decision maker. The important phrase is intended use. The life cycle does not stop at intention. Now imagine what happens after the tool has been live for a while. Managers start relying on it more heavily than intended. The outputs begin to shape decisions more than anyone planned. People challenge the system less because it feels familiar and efficient. If governance only focused on the launch moment, that drift in use could easily be missed. Monitoring should notice the change in reliance, the complaints, the edge cases, and the weakening of oversight. The practical lesson is simple. Trust is rarely lost in one dramatic moment. More often, it leaks away through a series of small, unchallenged decisions across the life cycle. Governance helps you notice those moments early, while they are still manageable. The main takeaway from Module 2 is that governance is the stitching that holds the life cycle together. Trust is shaped through idea, design, build, testing, launch, monitoring, change, and retirement, not only at the end. Your next step is to take the AI hiring scenario and walk through it stage by stage. Ask what you would want to know at design, build, testing, deployment, monitoring, change, and retirement. Once you do that, the life cycle stops being an abstract diagram and becomes a practical way of thinking. In the next module, we will build on this by looking more closely at risk, controls, and the evidence that makes trustworthy AI governance defensible.